Continuing our series on Rebbe Nachman's Outpouring of the Soul, we now come to Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is rather long, and I won't read the whole thing out loud. It is the midnight prayer observed in the Jewish tradition, Tikkun Hazot. And this is typically done in remembrance of the fall of the temple. And Rebbe Nachman has quite a bit to say along that theme, although he doesn't really get stuck there at all. For Rebbe Nachman, the primary purpose of the midnight prayer is to open that channel to God. The midnight prayer, which is a traditional part of the Jewish liturgy, generally held to be informal in most traditions, is nevertheless seen by Rebbe Nachman as an opportunity to draw closer to God. There is one key paragraph. From the words of the Rebbe, we understood that although many paths to God are discussed in his works, most of them are very difficult to follow. Therefore, the main path of each person is that of prayer. Whatever the situation, one must speak out, no matter how, and ask God to bring him from darkness to light and to help him attain true repentance. From darkness to light. And the main path of each person is that of prayer. These are the main points. Now it's interesting, it says from darkness to light, but in green meditation, we spend quite a lot of time practicing in the dark or by natural light. So there's no stigma attached with darkness. Darkness doesn't mean evil. Darkness isn't bad. But it's interesting that Rebbe Nachman talks about traveling from darkness to light. What he might have said is, following, for instance, the lead of St. John of the Cross, is that you must travel into darkness in order to get to the light. And the light that appears in the darkness of the practice of green meditation is a light that is different from the light we experience with our waking consciousness. It's not the light of a discriminative awareness, but the light of intuition, the light, the uncreated light that's spoken about in various different mystical traditions of Judaism and Christianity. Is the primordial light that's spoken of in Tibetan Buddhism, in the Dzogchen tradition, for instance. And so it's a kind of a luminescence that arises out of our willingness to enter into a dark phase of consciousness where ordinary discrimination falls away. So the question becomes how to access that practice, and what does prayer and repentance have to do with it? Well, repentance is a term that we sometimes see in Buddhism. It is used, although generally not that particular word, but you find equivalents to it in the tradition. Repentance literally means a turning back towards the presence of God and away from the various places of delusion we tend to get stuck in the day-to-day world. What all of these things have in common from our point of view is that they are all driven by light. They are all driven by our powers of discrimination and discernment. They are all hyper-lit. It's interesting, there's obviously nothing wrong with light. We are diurnal creatures. We live by day and we primarily rest by night. But the over-illumination both of our environments with artificial lighting and also of our own minds through various forms of stimulant. Okay, everything from caffeine to culture. Culture is a stimulant itself. Human culture itself is something that drives us to excess, that drives our consciousness into untenable places, unsustainable places. Now the strange thing is that with all of our media and all of our light sources, everything which are basically information sources, everything from our cell phone screens to our television sets to our movie theaters to really everything, every source of information. Even with all this information, we can't get ourselves turned around. We can't get ourselves to make even the slightest course correction. We can't get our elected officials to respond at all to the certain destruction that lies ahead of us if something isn't done. So clearly the realm of light is not where we are meant to look for that course correction. When Rebbe Nachman talks about finding a light in the darkness, I may be stretching it slightly, but I think intuitively that I've grasped what he's really saying. He's saying to chart your course through light by the stars and not by the sun. By the stars and not by the sun. If we chart our course by the sun, then we're charting our course through life by basically a kind of a consensual agreement. That means if everyone's wrong, we're wrong too. It means that we have no independence. We have no direct spiritual contact with anything really beyond ourselves or our ilk or our species. The stars, however, are another matter. I was up this morning at about 4 o'clock in the morning listening to the owls talk to one another, and the stars were out. And it seemed like all that was really happening was the owls going whoo-hoo, whoo-hoo, back to one another from one side of the mountain to the other, and the beautiful stars. Those stars are the closest we can come to eternity. Their light is millions and millions and millions of years old. They lie at a distance which can only be measured in light years, which is a simple way of saying that we just can't even wrap our minds around the distances at all. Light year is a way of cheating the mind into believing that it can grasp or understand something that is truly beyond its imagination. And so when we open ourselves up to the stars and to that reality that unfolds at night, we really realize that we're on a very, very long, long journey. Much longer than the span of a single human lifetime. Much longer than the birth and death of one human being. The journey of life is millions and millions, billions even, of years old, and potentially can last millions and billions more. And even when life here is gone, life continues elsewhere in an endless dance. We're part of that. But if we're part of that, then we're part of something much, much bigger that doesn't show itself easily when it's illuminated from all sides. Human culture has been, if you look at it from one point of view, for the last 12,000 years, nothing but an attempt to illuminate ourselves, meaning human being, from every imaginable side so that no shadow remains. It's almost as if we're posing for a photograph for God. We want to show ourselves in the most favorable possible light where there's no shadow whatsoever, and we illuminate ourselves from all sides so that there's no shadow left at all. And when we do that, we might as well not even be alive, because what's revealed by that much light is only delusion. There's a reason why the Bible calls Lucifer light bearer. It's interesting. You go to a fundamentalist church today and you hear a lot of talk about Lucifer. Sometimes I want to say, just go home and turn on all the lights and flip on your flat screen television set and watch it for 4 or 5 hours, and you can meet Lucifer in the flesh. There's no reason to wait for the second coming. There's no reason to wait for the apocalypse. Lucifer is right there, right in front of you. That much light and that much information makes you believe that you are the master of your own destiny, makes us believe that we understand everything that can be understood. It makes us believe that everything can be understood. There's no room for mystery. If there's no room for mystery, then there's no room for life. And there's no room for a future. And that's really what I believe Rebbe Nachman is saying. Now, the rabbis in Jerusalem, watching this on YouTube, and I suspect that there may be one or two, may be thinking, well, he's stretching it quite a bit. Indeed, I acknowledge that I am doing so. But bring the Rebbe to me now, and let us have a conversation and see if he doesn't agree. I think my heart tells me that he agrees. He agrees. And that's the teaching.